All right. Welcome back, Nutrition 101 students. So in chapter one, we took a look at generally what nutrition is as a science, what types of things exist in our food, what nutrients are in the different categories of those nutrients, and then a quick look at how nutrition is studied as a science. And so moving into chapter two, this is meant to be a bit of a review of what we've learned from studying nutrition, so from nutrition research. And so this is going to be just a surface level basic look at some of the guidelines and suggestions that have come from that research, as well as a look at how you can apply those guidelines and suggestions when you are making choices for what you eat, right? Whether that's at the grocery store or eating out or how you cook. This is going to be just very simple, basic things to try to aim for. So let's get right into this. Starting off, this term diet, I think often brings to mind the idea that something is being cut out from what you're eating or that you are specifically aiming to eat certain types of foods. But a diet doesn't need to be specifically geared towards one specific goal like that. A diet just generally refers to what you consume on a day-to-day basis, right? We all have a diet. You don't have to be following a vegan diet to have that term diet. You don't need to be following the DASH diet to have the term diet. So when we use this term, we're just referring to generally what you eat. And a healthy diet is going to look different on an individual to individual basis. We all have different factors impacting how our body utilizes our food and what types of nutrients we need to fuel our bodies for these different goals and activities we do. And then there's impacts from things like genetics and behavior, etc. So a healthy diet at the end of the day is going to look quite different person to person. But there are a few general goals that everybody should be aiming for based on what we've seen from the research. So some of the general principles and guidelines for a healthy diet that everyone should be aiming to follow is that your diet should be adequate, moderate, balanced, varied, and nutrient dense. So adequate, just referring to that you are getting enough. You get enough calories to fuel what your body needs throughout the day. You get enough of your macronutrients to keep up with the molecular structures that you need to build, repair, etc. You get enough of your micronutrients to help assist and let all of those processes occur. Moderate, meaning that it is not going too heavy on some of the things that we have seen to potentially have negative health effects. So these are things like saturated fats, which is debatable, and we'll talk about that a lot throughout this course, the back and forth about whether saturated fat is actually bad for you, and cholesterol. Trans fat, which we do have strong evidence for being bad for you, and then added sugars, which we also have some strong evidence for being unhealthy for us. So a moderate diet would be light on those things. Sodium could also be listed here, especially in an American diet. Sodium salt is very commonly overutilized in American diets. A balanced diet would have the right proportion of nutrients. So this kind of touches back on that acceptable macronutrient distribution range. You shouldn't be leaning too heavily into one macronutrient category over another. You need all three, and then a variety of your micronutrients as well, which brings us to that varied portion. In general, the more often that you are mixing up the types of foods that you're consuming, the more likely you are probably getting a variety of your micronutrients. So variety is always a good thing to aim for. And then nutrient density. So this is kind of often on the opposite side of the scale as energy density, which we talked about in the last chapter, where we took the overall amount of calories that you were getting from a certain meal and dividing that by the overall amount of food, so the grams. And that number, that energy density number, tells you how much energy per gram you got. So when we looked at these two example meals, the meal on the left was our lower energy density, and the meal on the right has a higher energy density, which means that you get more calories by eating less of this food on the right, whereas you would need to eat a lot more of the foods on the left here to get the same amount of calories. Right? And so those serve slightly different purposes. There are going to be some cases where an energy dense meal is necessary and is actually helpful for a particular activity, such as like endurance sports, Energy density is really important, right? Because if you're running long distances, you need lots of quick fuel just to power the energy that you're expending. And so you don't necessarily worry so much about the nutrient density, but you need that quick energy. However, in general, for what you're eating on a day-to-day basis, you should be aiming for a higher nutrient density. So even though you had to eat much more of this meal on the left, if we take a look at the amount of nutrients that are in that left meal versus right, that's represented on this bar chart here, with green representing the nutrients from our low energy density meal and yellow representing the nutrients from our high energy density meal. And you can see there's really very little comparison. Iron is somewhat close, I suppose, but in every other nutrient category that we're tracking on this chart, there is much more in our low energy density meal. And so that makes this meal more nutrient dense, right? There's a higher amount of nutrients per gram that you'd be getting from this green meal compared to the yellow meal. So in general, we want the foods we're eating to be nutrient dense. So lower calorie per gram but higher nutrient per gram. And then you can supplement your calorie needs with some energy dense meals or food options every now and then, because getting enough calories is also very important. But in general, you want to aim for nutrient density. And so what that looks like isn't going to be completely obvious to everybody. And so we do have plenty of tools available to us to help make these choices, to help gear us towards these nutrient dense food options. And so in the United States, some of our more useful tools provided to us from the United States Department of Agriculture are the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, the USDA Food Guide, which comes out with the My Plates and Food Patterns guidelines. But then we also have a variety of other private tools like diet planning apps and websites. And then we're going to look at what is likely your most useful tool as the average consumer in this country walking around the grocery store, which is being able to navigate the food labels and nutrition facts panels. So let's start by taking a look at these dietary guidelines for Americans. So every 5 years, the United States Department of Agriculture has a group of researchers who are reviewing all of the updated nutrition research that is coming out over the past 5 years, and then making some general suggestions based off of those updates. And so this gets updated every 5 years. It's meant to be a review of kind of everything that we know, and it is supposed to be geared towards the American diet or what the average American diet would look like based on the foods commonly consumed here. And so this emphasizes kind of those basic principles that we talked about earlier. By reviewing all of the suggestions from all of the nutrition research, it's summarized into this basic list. All of them seem to agree that a healthy diet should include a wide variety of vegetables and whole fruits, high fiber, and lots of whole grain foods. So all of this so far is plant-based. So a majority of a healthy diet would be from plant-based foods. It should. They also suggest that a healthy diet would include fat-free or low-fat dairy, which is very arguable in my opinion. Lots of communities around the world do not consume dairy at all, and you can get the same nutrients from other things. But there are some nutrients that are very dense in dairy foods. They can be a good source of those nutrients. And then a variety of protein-rich foods. If you eat meat, focusing on lean meat. And then as far as fats go, trying to focus on oils or your unsaturated fats as your main fat source. And so on the other end of that spectrum, they tend to agree that a healthy diet would limit saturated fats and trans fats. Again, saturated fats, slightly arguable. The research is not very strong on that. This is more kind of stuck around just from the idea that like fat is bad for you. If there's fat on your body, then and you want to lose that fat, you probably shouldn't be eating fat in your diet, but it is not that simple. But they still suggest to limit saturated fat. You should limit trans fats. They also suggest that you limit added sugar, sodium intake, and then alcohol consumption. Okay? All three of these things have, or four, if we include trans fats here, have very strong research showing the negative health impacts from consuming them. And so the other main resource that comes from our United States Department of Agriculture is this My Plate imagery. And this is meant to emphasize more individuality. So instead of giving listed food groups and food types and when and how to eat them, instead it is representing what you should be consuming based on the proportion of your meal, of your plate. that they should be taking up. So grains, fruits, and vegetables, again, all these are plants. So a majority of your meals should be from plant-based sources. And then some protein making up less than a quarter of that meal. And then again, they suggest dairy just as a common part of an American diet because the dairy industry is so ingrained in our agriculture. But again, not so important. You've probably seen those images if you went to school in the United States, up in your cafeterias in the schools. I think there's one in the food court here. But again, just a general representation. And then lastly, we have this diet planning tool that gets a bit more specific about the amounts of each of these food groups that you should be aiming for. And so this is based off of a 2,000 kilocalorie diet. Essentially, all dietary suggestions are geared around that 2,000 kilocalorie diet, which is supposed to be representing the average individual in America. But even that is a bit off for a lot of us. But anyways, for a 2,000 kilocalorie diet, they suggest 2 cups of fruits, 2.5 cups of vegetables, etc. And then you can plan around that by splitting them through your different meals and through your snacks throughout the day. And then to get even more specific with that, you could start planning that into your menu for the day. So where you're getting that those types of foods for each specific meal, etc. Right? This is really, really tough to do, especially if you are just beginning your step into diet planning. It's a lot of responsibility, a lot to figure out. And so a lot of the time, this is what keeps people from diet planning and from making different choices with their food because this takes a lot of work, right? And so luckily, nowadays, we have a lot of different apps, websites, and tools that can do a lot of that hard work for us. And there are free to access ones, though a lot of the better ones are going to require some sort type of payment or subscription. But if your goal is to create a more healthy diet that allows you to achieve the goals that you have for your body and for your day-to-day life, $10 to $15 a month to have all this kind of planned out for you really isn't all that bad, right? So we have a few different types of apps and websites. We've got diet trackers, which are where you would be inputting the things you're consuming, and you would be receiving data about what types of nutrients and how many calories you're getting from that food. So we're going to be using the chronometer.com website for our diet analyses assignments, but there are lots of free diet tracking websites like MyFitnessPal. There are diet planners, which would help you decide what types of foods to consume to meet certain health goals, and maybe even provide you with a grocery list. So things like My Plate from the USDA, and Eat This Much, which is a relatively new one that I was exploring this summer that I have a slide here to talk about. And then, of course, meal delivery services. These are much less catered to your specific health goals and much more limited on what foods they offer, but do offer different types of meals for different specific diets, right? If you're gluten-free or vegan or keto, right? So that can be a decent option, especially as for helping with time as a resource, which is a very valuable resource, right? This cuts out a lot of that planning and thinking and makes the cooking and prep process really easy. And so I included a slide here on Eat This Much because I think this is the first time I've seen a tool that really does a good job of including all of the important parts of diet planning and prepping. They ask you a lot of questions about your person and about your goals and your activity level, and they use that to develop your um, recommended dietary allowances, right? Your daily targets for each of your different nutrient categories and how much calories you should be consuming. And then from that, they generate a meal plan that would achieve those goals. They give you a bunch of different recipes, and you can swap these out for other ones that would achieve similar goals for you or fill in with the similar nutrient categories. So it gives you instructions on how to prep that food, and then also provides you with a grocery list for all the things that you would need for those foods. And it does this on a week by week basis, which I've never seen. I've seen a lot of this first two part of like, you should eat this and here's some recipes. But it's very rare to find a grocery list to go along with that, which I feel like is often kind of the hardest part with this. You don't go grocery shopping for one meal at a time, or most people don't go grocery shopping for one meal at a time. And so it's really helpful to get a look at everything you're going to need for the whole week if you wanted to eat this way. which I think is really cool. But this is a subscription-based website. I used my free trial to explore and come up with these things, but a very powerful tool for those that are interested. Okay, I'm gonna stop this video here and pick up the next one with food labels. So what information is available to you in the grocery store on your food packages.